Hi, and welcome to the State of Shakespeare. I'm Jim Elliott,
I'm Garrett Vandermeer.
and today on the program we have Susan Heyward. Hello, Susan.
Hello, friends.
Oh man, oh man. I just love the way you answered. Hi, friends. That's so
I think in another life I was a Quaker. Like I dig them so hard.
so good to have you here, Susan.
Yeah,
So good to be here.
in this COVID time. Susan Heyward is a classically trained actress. She's studied at various schools, including the Freedom Theater and Moscow School of Dramatic Art, receiving her BFA in drama from Carnegie Mellon. Most recognized for her role as Tamika Ward in the final two seasons on the Orange is the New Black, she has appeared on other notable television programs such as HBO's Vinyl, PlayStation's first original series Powers, and most recently was seen opposite Edie Falco in the CBS drama Tommy. Her stage work includes Juliet in Romeo and Juliet and Ophelia in Hamlet. She was last seen on stage as Rose Granger Weasley in the original Broadway cast of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. Her latest film work can be seen on Netflix's The Incredible Jessica James. Wow, Susan, you have done a wide variety of stuff. Pretty impressive.
Thanks. If they call me, I pick up the phone and say yes, yes. Where am I going? Where do you want me? Yes, I will do it. Yes.
How long has it been since you've done Shakespeare?
Gosh, I was thinking about that right before the call. I think it's been over 10 years. Yeah.
Are you hungry to try to play them again, or do you think you've played out that string?
I don't think I've played out that strain. I'm hoping that I'm growing into a new character, basically. When I worked at American Shakespeare Center for almost 2 years, and so I was fresh out of school, young. So in a production of Macbeth, I played everybody's son, and I played princesses and Juliets and Ophelias, and I'm hoping now that if I can go back, it will be to play adults. Adults might be a nice shift.
How has your perspective on Shakespeare changed in the 10 years since you've last visited playing?
Oh gosh, it's even been a larger arc than that. I fell in love with Shakespeare when I was a kid. I was maybe 12 or 13, and I got to, oh, by the way, that Freedom Theater that was in Philadelphia, I realized the way I wrote it, it could have sounded like Freedom Theater in Moscow. That was in North Philly, and we studied Taming of the Shrew, and that scene where Petruchio and Catherine meet, and they're so naughty, they're so bad, and they're saying all these, very sexual things. I remember being a 13-year-old going, what? We could say what? So there was a really long love affair with the language and how decadent it could be. And then something happened with for me, a lot of the colorism stuff, like a lot of the dark is bad and light is good, kind of started to crop up, and I started to become aware of it. And it's like a matrix pill, as soon as you take it and you see that in one place, you go to the texts and you start to kind of see it everywhere. And, the more our society has become aware of racial differences and cultural cues that we kind of pick up without realizing it, the more I come to the text and just like had a tunnel vision. I couldn't quite see anything else.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. Garrett and I were just having a brief conversation about that because as educators, it's definitely on the forefront of our consciousness at this point. I think it's interesting because I've been trying to figure out how to approach my students about this. And one of the things that I kind of feel good about in terms of the Shakespearean productions that have happened since the 1970s, really, where Shakespeare productions have been on the forefront of casting and gender blind casting and race blind casting. And I really find comfort in that because Shakespeare is so malleable in terms of casting. I mean, we've interviewed Lisa Volpe, who does an all-female version, Deborah Ann Bird, who does an all-African-American version of Othello, I think, recently. And so in production, Shakespeare is certainly incredibly progressive.
Well, I don't think we can dance around the fact that Shakespeare definitely has a bias when it comes to skin color. The examples in the text are so abundant. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that in this day and age?
I think a lot of it is being able to have the conversation. I particularly the United States, we don't like to look at that, talk about it. We like to say that time is over, we're good. And those productions that I've led colorblind casting in the forefront of that, I think they can also be places where it's safe to talk about. It's safe to talk about our biases. It's because Shakespeare was a product of his time and culture, just the same way we are. And I think that's one of the things that I found really difficult, because at least I'd see Shakespeare productions and see talkbacks, and then kind of look around like, are we not going to talk about this? We're going to talk about everything else. And so I would hope that the same way Taming of the Shrew, for me, was the beginning of a frank conversation about sexuality. That is something else that our culture doesn't necessarily like to talk about and like get education on. I would hope that these plays could be a place to keep talking about that, that thing that we really want to dance around instead.
It would be nice to think that. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
I don't think that the plays want to be a vehicle for perpetuating bias. I don't think that they necessarily want to be, but
Yeah, I don't think so.
there's no question that they can be, because it is simply so that it, like I said, it's so pervasive throughout the plays.
Yeah, and it's tough. I like, there's all this progressivism. There's this opportunity for stretching the text, and then sometimes it's what people are familiar with too, right? Like there's also people have to fill seasons and get butts in seats. And it's like, oh, we know this place, so we'll go see it, rather than having that slot filled by a different playwright, someone who we maybe don't know. So like they're not either one, right? They're not these bastions of progressivism, and they're also not. It's just a play. Like so we put all this stuff on top of it, and sometimes need it to be more than it actually is.
Well, it's nice when plays serve their function of being a catalyst for conversation. And
Yeah, and fun and entertaining. I admit that I brought the weight to the conversation in the first place, but sometimes there's all this stuff happening. It's like all this political stuff on top of it that the play kind of chokes a little bit. Like the human fun part, the part that this is an archetype of a kind of person that exists in humanity. That kind of stuff can get choked out sometimes.
Yeah,
It needs to be fun and sexy.
Right. It should be. Yeah, absolutely, it should be. And I think some of the best theater is that kind of theater that is fun, and you're laughing and having a good time following a story, whether it's a love story or comedy or a tragedy. But then, as you're walking home, you say, or in a talkback, you say, what's going on with that? And it just gives you food for thought.
I think so. There's a documentary that, because at heart I am still a Shakespeare nerd, always will be. I watch this thing maybe once a year. It's Kiss Me Petruchio. It's on YouTube. It's basically a documentary that follows Meryl Streep and Raul Julia in their production of Taming of the Shrew. And the first time I watched the documentary, I brought all of my assumptions about Taming of the Shrew. I brought all of my, it's sexist, it's this, it's that. I brought all of that. And to watch, the two of them and their director and the audience really ask questions, and while having as much fun as humanly possible, also seeing this deeper story about a really rich brat who has used her intellect to terrorize people, meeting her match and learning a lesson that's not necessarily about time or society. It's about learning how to be gracious, which blew my mind. I was like, if every Shakespeare production could do something like that, like something that human, I'd never leave the theater. Never.
You bring up Taming of the Shrew, and you've chosen to do something from Taming of the Shrew.
I did.
So this is Susan Heyward doing Catherine from The Taming of the Shrew, Act 4, Scene 3.
The more my wrong, the more his spite appears. What? Did he marry me to famish me? Beggars that come into my father's door upon entreaty have a present alms. If not elsewhere, they meet with charity. But I, who never knew how to entreat, nor never needed that I should entreat, am starved for meat, giddy for lack of sleep, with oaths kept waking, and with brawling fed. And that which spites me more than all these wants, he does it under name of perfect love. As who should say, if I should sleep or eat, 'twere deadly sickness, or else present death. I prithee, go and get me some repast. I care not what, so it be wholesome food.
Oh, terrific.
Sure.
I love the way you say the word OATHS.
Especially his, right? It's like, I love you, no, I'm doing this for you. I owe thy Brahman, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Like all of those vowels can, you can put so much in there.
So what is happening? He's being starved?
She's been married off to a clown and a fool. And he's carted her off from her very comfortable living situation at home with her father, where she ruled the roost. And even though he says he loves her, he doesn't let her sleep or eat. He forces her into deep, deep discomfort. And Catherine is a woman who's never been uncomfortable, and she hates it.
So why does she put up with it?
In this moment, she doesn't. In this moment, she's saying, I don't understand. I cannot rule over him. And she's speaking to a servant. And I think it's her like understanding that sometimes you have to ask for things nicely. She says entreat 3 times
Really dug
in the
into
speech.
that too, yeah.
And the last 2 lines, she tries out that word, I prithee. This time I didn't play that up, but I think she's someone who's learning how to be gracious, learning how to ask, and it's going terribly.
It's a love story, so it all ends up that they end up together.
They do.
How does that work? I mean,
for me, a lot of it is context. This play is written in a culture where women did not have rights at all. It's also written from the point of view of a rich woman, a very comfortable rich girl. And so the idea that in this social contract, if you're a woman, you're rich, you're comfortable, a man is taking care of you, there's a certain amount of graciousness that is required of you, whether you want to be gracious or not. And I think the way it works in context at the end is that it's a lesson of a woman saying, you know what, I do have certain strengths that this culture does not value, but I can afford to grow, I can afford to be gracious, I can afford to respect people, I can literally afford to
right.
be nice and be kind.
The other thing that somebody pointed out to me most recently, it was a student, we were having this conversation, and that she likes to point out that it's a play within a play.
Yes.
And nobody ever does it that way, because the beginning part of Taming the Shrew is awful. The Christopher Sly part is like as bad as it gets. So everybody just cuts it and does the play within the play. But it is a play within a play.
I'm always curious about the things we think we don't need. In the production of Romeo and Juliet that I did, the director had cut it before we started rehearsals. And he ended up cutting this, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 line piece in the morning after scene between Romeo and Juliet. And it's all this really arcane language of like turtle doves and things wrapping in each other. And I was like, yeah, ditch it, screw it. And it was kind of hard it took a lot of work to get through the second half of the play. And then I went back and realized it's all embedded stage direction of the 2 of them hugging each other. They're saying all of that while holding on to each other for dear life. And it's this beautiful, like, quiet moment of the 2 of them finally being pulled apart and kept apart for another 2 acts. And when I realized that, I was so devastated that we had chucked it. That we like.
But I can understand wanting to cut archaic language, but
yeah, like we don't get it. Or what do we replace it with, right? Like, okay, maybe we cut that language, but we have a little musical interlude where it's quiet and the 2 of them are hugging. That kind of, the plays they are elastic that way. They can withstand that kind of playing.
I'd like to think that they've gone beyond the Elizabethan era and all
Yeah.
that stood for.
Yeah.
And there is a translation project happening, and so.
Oh my! Please keep it decadent. That's my only
Yeah.
all this talk about Americans only use so many of the words in the English language. There's so much good stuff in there.
Yeah, is that one of the things that you fell in love with? I mean, you mentioned that there was some bawdy references and all that stuff, and then you mentioned the language. So the language is something that you fell in love with?
It is. It is. I was a bookworm really early, so I read a lot. And then the joy of getting to say those words or hearing them, it was a really visceral experience for me. And I feel like when it's done right, it's a visceral experience for everyone.
Did you come by that visceral sensation yourself, or was someone there with you?
Oh, that was a teacher. Oh yeah, those were the teachers at Freedom Theater in North Philly. I think they chose the scene between Catherine and Petruchio for the naughty language, but be able to say a joint stool and that kind of aggressive, pointed energy that middle schoolers have roiling inside their bodies and desperately need an outlet for,
right.
or the permission to say, come sit on me, come sit on it. And this was when Bart Simpson was saying, eat my shorts, man. Like all that like it all lives in the same place. I see people now who maybe weren't bookworms or maybe don't have the access to theater and art, and it can be hard for people to express themselves because they're looking for the word and it's not right there.
Going back, I was just curious. Now we have to go back to Catherine. We've sort of danced around the subject. She is a captive, and she's sort of come around this way. Here, I have two questions about doing it in this day and age. First of all, should we be doing the play anymore at this point?
Oof. I mean, when I'm out drinking with friends and I've had more than my allotted two, sometimes I get a little wild and I say, hiatus, 10 years, nothing. 10 years, no Shakespeare productions anywhere. We need a break. We need to go live other lives, have language affairs with other playwrights, and then come back and see who we are, what the plays can show us, like as a mirror to nature, So in one sense, my answer is yes and no. Like maybe we need a break. And then we can come back to it because they're not going to go anywhere.
That is really interesting. And now I'm thinking about something else, which is you came out of school and one of your first jobs, it sounds like, was at the American Shakespeare Center.
It was one of my very first.
And I think a lot of people could say that. I know I could say that my first job was acting Shakespeare at the Shakespeare Festival. And so that kind of employment for young actors is terrific. And one of the reasons we do Shakespeare is because it's free. We don't have to pay for it. I would say, let's figure out what do we replace that with for young actors who are coming out of here.
Yes, that's exciting to me. We have wonderful playwrights who we could do the same.
Garrett, we're gonna have to expand our canon.
Oh my gosh, I've been obsessed about Cat on a Hot Tin Roof for like the last 3 months. Every now and then a play will kind of come and visit with me, and it'll just sit and I'll meditate on it and kind of see it from different angles. And Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, there's so much in there about class that we Americans pretend we don't do class. We're egalitarian. What do you mean?
Yeah, right.
And we can skip over that stuff in Shakespeare. Right?
But let's flip the coin for a second. Let's just say, as is probably the case, that Shakespeare's not going anywhere. We're not going to stop producing Shakespeare in the next 10 years. So, and then some intrepid director says, hey, I want to do Taming of the Shrew. How would you approach it in this day and age?
Well, I think I was a little spoiled by my work at American Shakespeare Center, I have to admit. The practical production values that I found there were pretty also intoxicating. They recreated the indoor playhouse that Shakespeare's company would have worked in And so when we did the play, it was a thrust stage. There's audience on three sides. There were stools on stage where audience members sat on stage.
Oh, cool.
The lights were up, so there wasn't this separation between the action on stage and the audience. Direct address was employed, so sometimes there was some text that was actually addressed to audience members. And that kind of open atmospheric conversation, danger, a little risky, right? Because you empower the audience and you make them a part of making sure this thing works, rather than putting them in the dark. You guys be quiet. We're gonna talk. We're gonna have all the lights on us, and when we're done, you clap and you go home. So I would be interested in shifting the production to probably be a little closer to the conditions that Shakespeare was writing for.
And would you take the point of view that Catherine's this spoiled rich kid who's never really experienced?
I'd start there, and not to get too heavy, but America maybe has a little listening to do on that score. We've been rich for a real long time, and how we show up in the world, folks can tell. Maybe some lessons to learn there.
I like this. This is interesting.
Oh, I had a question too.
Yeah.
I think in your podcast with Shireen, you mentioned that you were working on Hamlet with your students at the time. Someone was working on Hamlet with students at the time, and I was like, ooh, how did that go? Hamlet's another one that haunts me sometimes.
Here's the thing about Hamlet when I'm teaching is that I try to steer them away from it.
What do you mean?
Well, simply because that's usually one of the 2 or 3 plays that a non-knowledgeable Shakespearean has heard of, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they all want to do To Be or Not to Be, or some of the more famous Hamlet speeches. So I always try to I don't say no, but I will say maybe you should look at a different monologue, a lesser known monologue. But I also did a reading. We did of Hamlet in my class. We did when COVID hit. We had the Zoom thing, and I was like, "What am I gonna do?" And so one of the things I decided to do is let's do a Zoom play reading. And so we did Hamlet, and I had everybody play Hamlet. All 12 students rotated playing Hamlet, and it was it was really interesting to get perspective. But one thing I realized, it's a 4-hour class. And we didn't make it through Hamlet reading in 4 hours. I mean, I think I could have done that reading for 3 class periods, because there was stop and discussion about what's going on here, and is Ophelia, what happened to Ophelia, who did her in, or what's Hamlet doing right now, and but it was definitely eye-opening for the students, because some of them hadn't read it, and some of them were like hadn't never seen it or heard it, and had just read it. And so many of the comments were like, to hear it out loud was really fascinating.
Yeah. Jim, I don't know if we're going to put this on the podcast, but I have a different take on it, which is that, I learned IPA from Judy Moreland at UCLA, and she launched us right into the To Be or Not to Be speech, and we studied it, and we all got to speak it, and just really enjoy making those words our own.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it at the time, but I really appreciate it now, because I never got to play Hamlet on stage, and probably, maybe, I don't think anybody else in my class ever got to play. That was my only real time, being able to embody those words. So now I'm thinking, maybe I want to offer a class where it's just the great speeches, where everyone gets a chance to say all of the great speeches and just enjoy the hell out of
that. I would do.
I third that.
Yeah,
that's delicious. That's one of the caveats with the 10-year break that I usually go to when I'm a little tipsy, because who are the Hamlets you're gonna miss? Who are the Juliets you're gonna miss? Who are the Mercutios you're gonna miss in a whole 10-year break? That might be a little extremist. So I'm glad that that's not gonna happen.
I feel like we've probably reached the point where in the podcast that we produce, we'll probably this is like the postscript. But I have more questions I want to ask Susan about, because you are really trained. But you went to Carnegie Mellon, right? Fantastic training. And from by reputation, I didn't.
Yes.
I don't know firsthand. So when you walk onto a television or a film set, and you're mixing with the other actors. Do you feel that training has served you well?
Yes, unequivocally, yes. For me, and not for everyone, but for me, there's a tool shed that I have that I wouldn't have had without the training, right? So, especially when I'm dealing with a director who can see through my tricks, there's also a language there where they can go to the technique and say, okay, well, you know, dig into those vowels over there, or do a physical language, note that kind of opens up my imagination, and there's a shorthand there, rather than if you're dealing with someone who maybe doesn't have as many tools because they've maybe trained, but maybe not trained as extensively, or checked out as many different techniques, then there's a little more work that the director often has to do in order to be specific about playing. And that's what I try to get to, right? To keep things playful and elastic. And it's hard because I'm also really serious about my shit. So I forget, I care a lot. So sometimes I'm like trying to hit a target a little bit.
So here's my follow-up question. So now, with the benefit of hindsight and years of experience in the industry, I mean, you know the kinds of jobs you're getting. You know where your niche is and where your strengths are. You know when you walk into a casting director's office, the kind of role that they're going to see you for. My question is, knowing what you know now with the benefit of hindsight, if you had to do it all over again, would you have invested those 3 or 4 or whatever, however many years you spent getting advanced training, getting the training, or would you have straight into the business and started trying to work?
Ooh, that's a sticky question. I think I might have left Carnegie maybe 1 semester early. Mostly because the last semester of, oh God, I'm gonna get so much trouble. That's all right. The last semester often focuses on your entry into the business. And I've found that it's more valuable to know who you are, know what you want to do, know the kind of people you want to work with, than like having a big splashy entrance into the industry. The industry's not going anywhere. People are always going to be telling stories. What's far more important is knowing who you are and know the kind of work you want to do, rather than your type or like what you sell or what people want from you. It took a long time for me, I think, to know the difference between what people wanted from me and how they saw me versus what I wanted to do. And I think had I left a little bit early, that learning curve would have been a little more, I don't know, what's the version for faster? Quicker, yeah. I would have learned more that, I don't actually want to do that. And it's a beautiful relief to let go of what people want from you, rather than be like, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do this.
Right.
I'm conflicted about it too. I mean, I didn't graduate from graduate school until I was almost 28. And so like the train had left the station, really, as far as, certain roles in the industry.
Yeah.
I'm just starting and competing for stuff, and I'm competing against people that have 10 years in, and all sorts.
That's real.
But when I look back, I think on those 3 years that I spent, and they were the best 3 years of my life. I mean, I would not trade them for anything. And if I had a time machine and another $50,000, I could.
And I feel like that's the thing, right? It's like everybody's journey really is their own, and like who knows what those 10 years would have looked like had they not been in school training. But training, it's an exponential relationship, I feel like the longer we have it in our bodies and we actually use those tools, it just does nothing but support us in whatever we want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, I went with a very specific focus, because I didn't go until I was about 26 or 27. I think I was even later than you, Garrett. But one of the things that when a student asks me, or when someone asks me, about grad school, I say, know what you're going for. but B, don't expect it to be the answer to your career.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people go to, acting programs or schools thinking that, they're going to come out of here and they're going to be, doing all sorts of, wonderful stuff. And that's just not the case, whether you're going to Carnegie Mellon or Yale or NYU or any of the big ones, as well as, University of Washington and Texas, Montana. So I think it really does become, but then what you said, Susan, is absolutely 100% true, which is experiencing it and the tools that you gain and the knowledge that you gain, as long as you keep that moving forward. And clearly you're trained. I mean, vocally you are as clear as a bell, you're using sounds, you're doing all that good stuff that you spend time in school doing. The other way, the practical way of looking at it, is that you just dedicate 3 years of your life to improving your tools.
Yeah.
Right. And if left on your own devices, you're not going to do that. You're not going to spend 3 years going to voice class and going, it's just not going to do it.
And then with the same people, the idea that doing that with a company and learning a certain group of people in that kind of intimate way is something that I miss dearly. Our industry isn't necessarily built to support that right now. It's really difficult, but that kind of knowing your instrument and then looking across someone on the stage and knowing their instrument too.
Right.
Oh man, we all miss that right now, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks for indulging me with that, doorknob question.
No, I love it. I love those questions.
Susan, thank you.
Guys, thank you. Thank you so much.
It's been really delightful.
Yeah.
It really has been.
I wish you the best. And now when I see you on TV, I'll be like, I know her.
Come on.
That's right. Yeah. Hey, she's on our show.
I'm prepping to get back on set now. So
for the Netflix?
No, the Netflix joint is over. Somehow managed to book something in the middle of quarantine, which doesn't make any sense. But there's a new show on the Oprah Winfrey Network that they're starting, and we're supposed to start shooting in October.
Fantastic.
Susan Heyward, thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's been delightful talking to you.
Thank you so much. So grateful for the opportunity to come and share and play a little bit. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan.
I'm Garrett Vandermeer.
And I'm Jim Elliott.
And thank you for listening to The State of Shakespeare.